morning. So, thank you to everybody who's attending the third conference of the Manchester Institute of Psychotherapy. The title of this conference is An Understanding of the Self. The universal striving for meaning is central to an understanding of the human condition. In my dialogue today, I hope to embrace the spirit of the Institute and the conference by adding my thoughts to the many who have given their time, their energies, and of course their thinking to the conference, by providing a wealth of workshops, all of which are based on the subject of an understanding of the self. In considering this subject, my own thoughts were drawn to how, what, and when this began, the bones of the subject. As a gestaltist, I believe in the holism of the therapeutic experience to include behaviours, mannerisms, the background, the emotions, and the instincts of my clients as well as the drivers. I find, as I'm sure many of you do, that clients initially are only interested in the why and how they can change. In my years as working as a practitioner, I have never managed to acquire a magic wand or a glass ball to aid my work. Therefore, I rely upon my curiosity, my skills and my experience as a psychotherapist to support my work and the client. So, as I considered this conference and the honour of presenting this keynote speech, I began painstakingly to wade through articles, books and training that I attended. What continually came up for me was the striving for knowing that clients bring, as well as asking, what is the meaning of us being born, living our lives, and our impact upon others? Remember, I am a gestaltist, an existentialist, and a humanist, so relationship and how we relate is paramount for me. Philosophers, scientists, and various religions throughout the ages have sought to answer this question, and I kept returning to the fact that without consciousness, we cannot pose this question to ourselves, our teachers, our colleagues, or our spiritual leaders. Indeed, not even to our own therapists. So today, the bones of this conference, for me, is not the why, it is the how of consciousness. These were the questions that were important to me. If we did not have consciousness, then we could never pose the question. When did humans gain consciousness? From an evolutionary point, what is consciousness? And when, as humans, do we gain consciousness from a developmental point of view? I wish to share the answers that I have found so far, and I appreciate that you may know or know something different. I am not looking at a spiritual faith when I consider consciousness. It is a part of each of us which is internal and guides us. I am hoping that by looking at what is behind the striving for meaning, I will not cross over into the various workshops that we can all enjoy later. I realise that some human beings, by accident, disease or genetic makeup, do not have the consciousness I am researching. In this piece of work, I am referring to the consciousness that the majority of humans have. In researching my topic, I found that many academics and philosophers during the last 20 years or so have given the feeling of consciousness a name, a shorthand, to try and umbrella the experience. It is known as qualia. Qualia as a word is a plural of quale, which is an experience. For example, colours, feelings, emotions, the sound of C flat, the smell of a hot pot, etc. There is no little man or woman inside each of us experiencing these quails. However, it may feel as though there is an inner voice. The scientists say there are a lot of neurons, water, chemical, electrical signals, all hooked up in a complicated matter that we call the brain. So how is the vividness of experience taking place inside this organ, or indeed inside our bodies as a whole? The science of what and how brain processes relate to consciousness is known as ontogenics. Surely, of all the things we can express about consciousness, it is a personal phenomenon for each of us, and thus entirely subjective. It seems as though the question is consciousness real, or is it just a side effect of the brain, that is, an epiphenomenon? This divides current and philosophical thinking. If it is not real and an illusion, wouldn't we need to be conscious either to perceive or misperceive it? Philosopher David Chalmers from the University of Arizona divides a problem of consciousness into a group of easy problems and one hard question. Chalmers says that the science, through its usual way of proving, will eventually gain agreement in the future. Scientists would understand the different brain states, such as being awake, sleepwalking, unconsciousness, or intoxication, about deliberation of behaviours, how people focus, and the discrimination of hot and cold, hard, soft, etc. Chalmers sees the hard problem as how physical processes in the brain allow us subjective phenomenal experience. If everything is because of behaviour, how does that account for the little person, the little voice in our heads? This is referred to as the Cartesian theatre, when we imagine a voice that tells us of our experience in relation to ourselves. What is experience, and why is it so vibrant? What is the vibrancy of the experience? For today, to keep this brief and on track, I shall only consider three scientific schools: the dualists, the physicalists, and the reductionists, who chew over the massive subject of the epiphenomenon of consciousness. Dualists believe that consciousness and qualia are real. They are not side effects. They view consciousness as a basic, irreducible aspect of the universe. They agree with David Chalmers that there is a hard problem. The ancient Greek concept of the soul is similar to what Chalmers is purporting. He discusses that differing properties of matter and energy is behind consciousness, and to date these have not been figured out with our present understanding of physics. Dualists try to confirm their point by asking us to imagine if there were people without consciousness who could still talk, be in relation, love and have further emotions, and yet have no idea of being in the world. How or why can they relate to others? Would they be called zombies? However, as there is no such group, their theory lacks any clinical or qualitative research. All the scientists and philosophers agree that the concept of consciousness and mind are different. Mind is considered to be the brain dynamics, how the processes, for example, the autonomous body regulation. Consciousness is the processes that sustain reflection and individual experience. The physicalists, also known as the materialists, as written about by David Papineau and another group called the reductionists, believe that consciousness isn't what it seems. Consciousness is not truly fundamental. It is more of a side effect. To them, there really is no hard problem. There is no relative question regarding epiphenomenalism. Consciousness to them must be causally inert, as it doesn't truly exist at all. Consider watching a ship sail away from the shore. The ship is not really becoming smaller as it moves away from us, although it appears to. Science tells us this is just an illusion. We have convincing evidence that we are on an almost round planet spinning around the sun, and that the ship does not fall off the edge of our planet as previously believed by our ancestors. The physical reductionists say that our illusion of consciousness and self-consciousness are questions of cultural planning and programming, and an inherent evolutionary selective tendency to search for root causes. What is considered the normal features of consciousness? Ongoing emotional engagement, ability to record new memories and fit them with old memories, rather than procedural memories that allow us to breathe, to walk, without thinking or consideration. To get from one side of the room to another, I do not ensure that a certain group of muscles is going to contract and expand. Surely consciousness includes our identity, our knowing, and our personal idiosyncrasies. The physicalists and reductionists have various researches from brain experiments over the last 25 years. Many of these results are the work of Benjamin Libet, which includes the work which proves our consciousness is half a second or so behind reality. We know what has happened. His other work show we act before making a decision. This means that behaviour is often set, and that thinking is proving our behaviours rather than guiding it. The reductionists repeat that the experience of consciousness is an epiphenomenal, and Libet, whom I cited earlier, discussed that it is not free will, it is free won't. He believes that the free won't is engaged as it is the I won't, what we may call the impulse regulation. These are the thoughts of consequences which, when considered, stops us shooting our nagging spouse, throttling the traffic warden, or any other act that may cause ourselves greater harm or distress than what we are feeling towards that person. Dreaming is a non-waking activity which can also embrace consciousness. Some, including the late Fitzpearls, believe that dreams are the royal road to awareness, as it is the unconscious moving in to consciousness. An interesting question is around sleepwalking. Is the person conscious when this happens? Absent automism, persistent vegetative slate and blind sight. Blind sight is when people have working eyes, become blind due to cortex damage, and still have subconscious mental responses to the objects in front of them, are being studied by scientists. Dr. Antonio Damasio writes about these cases in The Feeling of What Happens. These situations provide, determine and measure the characteristics and workings of consciousness. We ask why and how. Remember the subtitle of this conference. The universal striving for meaning is central to the understanding of human condition. There may be some survival value to this, expressing our joys, pains, love and fears, especially in a social or relational context. This could keep us safe However, is more than this. Wikipedia says, consciousness is a term that refers to a variety of aspects between the relationship between the mind and the world with which it interacts. It has been defined as subjectivity, awareness, the ability to experience or to feel, wakefulness, having a sense of selfhood, or the executive control system of the mind. Despite the difficulty of definition, many philosophers believe there is a broadly shared underlying intuition about what consciousness is. So when did human beings begin to have consciousness? The Merriam-Webster dictionary tells us it was firstly recorded in 1629. However, I believe the date may be more significant to the printing press rather than the awareness of consciousness. Again, there are varying thoughts to how and when consciousness evolved. Was it through natural selection or an accident that qualia, the vivid experience of knowing, happened within humans? If so, did other mammals or species evolve consciousness? When considering survival of the fittest, why did we not evolve into mechanical beings as depicted in such scientific entertainment such as Star Wars, Star Trek, and other works of fiction? Big brains and significant thought processes allow us, as a group, to recognise the benefit of tribes and associations. However, we also do not choose to act as colony as insects, which have proven to be in a highly efficient group of species lasting for millions of years. With consciousness, we produce, admire and long for creativity in the form of art and culture. Lasting or not so lasting pieces of music and pictures, fantasy writings, all enhance our lives in changing degrees. Indeed, the first cave paintings, when man first left his interpretation of the world, were sketched 50,000 years ago. I am unaware of any other species that does this to date. So are we the only species to have consciousness? Apparently not. Although we are the only species that are known to have an extended autobiographical consciousness. This includes the ability to unite our experiences with the environment and others, to put ourselves in other people's situations and guess at their feelings, whilst holding a knowledge of the past and present and being able to guess regarding the future. Some higher mammals, apes, dogs, whales and dolphins, to name but a few, do have, scientists believe, a core consciousness due to their more sophisticated memory functions and a greater capacity to join the various features of the senses into a detailed, coherent mental picture of their surroundings. They may have some sense of their own existence, they may know themselves up to a point. Reptiles have only a brainstem and a hypothalamus. Therefore, they only react to their basic needs: food, light and safety. Recognising that as humans we have neocortex too, all other mammals have a brain that consists of a midbrain. Scarufi says this allows mammals to act upon their environment rather than to react to their environment, which reptiles do. Due to our human ability to make noises, to convert these into a complex language and describe emotions, when we are flooded with various situations that have many, if not infinite, sensory images to process and make sense of, The brain needed to grow to utilise all of this information. Jerison states that it is our nervous systems that help create a concept of how the world is, and it is that model that helps us understand our world. As children, we begin to refine this, and during adulthood, we act due to our own interpersonal internal model, which can be different from anyone else's model. Many scientists believe it is a rich language that was actually both the forebearer and the reason for consciousness appearing in man. Others suggest it was a basic survival need, that people who understood and could guess correctly what others thought and their feelings were more likely to live. If someone comes forward swinging an axe and has a certain look on their face, connected with screams, with both consciousness and knowledge of what you are capable of, therefore knowledge of what another may be capable of, that may save your life. We now know that mirror neurons can allow us to feel empathy for others, for us to register how it feels to be in someone else's situation. If this attachment-based network was the predecessor or the reason for consciousness beginning, that is a subject that divides professionals. It can be reasoned that having the ability, when mirror neurons are fired, to become more knowing, guessing about our peers, that would encourage a greater need for families, tribes and communities to survive under the ethos of united we stand, divided we fall. Surely, for us to know each other, we need to differentiate and know there is a me. Our memories and experience allow us to consider past, present and future. We can communicate on a very complex basis with others that know our language. The thinker writes, contrary to popular belief, the gene-centred theory of evolution does not imply that the point of all human striving is to spread our genes. People don't selfishly spread their genes. Genes selfishly spread themselves. They do it by the way they build our brains, by making us enjoy life, health, sex, friends and children. The genes buy a lottery ticket for representation in the next generation with odds that were favourable in the environment in which we evolved. How consciousness first came into being and how it evolved can never be proven. To date, scientists, philosophers and historians are now considering this question. When during our evolution did consciousness arise? I have found various theories, ranging from the most recent times, possibly 3,000 years ago, from James, to those that it began with the development of the neocortex 200 million years ago. That is a considerable span. An interesting theory I found was that consciousness has always been there. However, in Darwinian fashion, for some species to exist, the need for compassion, empathy and awareness would not help them live and spread their seed, so their consciousness did not survive. Interestingly enough, if the early writers, those who scripted the Iliad, the Christian Bible, were without consciousness, then they would have been unable to distinguish between fact and fiction. In the scriptures, they act without conscious decision-making and often rely upon voices heard. An interesting fact is that they are written in the same form as we know people with schizophrenia use when talking. To coin a phrase from Scarufi, these stories are all action and no introspection. It has been noted that in the later writing of the Bible, and indeed the writing of the Odyssey, there is a note of consciousness arising. Those that believe consciousness only arose in more recent ages would have us believe that societies that we saw as ancient and developed civilizations were composed of individuals that had no awareness of right or wrong. They were without conscious memory, meaning they had no concept of good and evil, no memories, without thought of the past, and definitely no thought of the future. So unable to know when we as a species did develop consciousness, when does consciousness emerge in an individual? Is it with us from our embryonic state, or is it a developmental milestone that can be gauged? If we were to believe that we need a society and language, then it would only be when we recognise we are part of a group, be that of a family or race, with a common language, that our consciousness evolves. Anything we are aware of at a given moment part our consciousness, making conscious experience at once the most familiar and the most mysterious aspect of our lives. That was from Wellhams and Schneider. Scientists have suggested that the only way we can really know would be to take a newborn and keep it from any other being. Within our world, thank goodness, this would not be humanely or ethically possible. Is the nearest we have to that experience those children who by fortune, or the lack of it, were brought up by another species? When this happens, and these children are found during their early adulthood or late teens, the ability to humanise them has been impossible. It is paramount for socialisation to begin at a very early age, for the initial neural pathways to be laid down as a foundation for attachments and a conscience to grow. Without language, the complexities required to inform others and be informed in a complex way, including recognising tenses, what heaviness is, for example, may mean that it would be near impossible for them to gain the extended autobiographical consciousness. It is likely that these children who have had no human contact throughout their early years may have a core consciousness, and it may be improbable that they would advance this further. What do I mean by core consciousness? This concept would mean an awareness of self and others, however not the autobiographical memory, which would be built in layers, resulting in the advanced biological consciousness. Gardenfors, the Swedish philosopher, states that sensations are what are happening to the body, and the perceptions are what are happening in the world, that in turn impacts upon the body. This would account for the why that many people are curious about. The universal striving for meaning is central to an understanding of the human condition. We can, with perceptions, understand why and what has caused a change for us. Unlike other mammals, due to our enhanced simulators in our brain, we can work out the why. Due to our recognition of differentiation, we know what is us and what is something else. This ability we share with other large mammals. Again, what differs us from those mammals is not the ability to plan, it is the ability to plan ahead and to anticipate. The knowledge and the impact of death and what that would mean to us as individuals can make us morose. Other animals only grieve in the present when death has happened and the other is not responding. Brain scans of fetuses at 26 weeks show brain waves indicating consciousness. However, regarding developmental milestones, Ferrari and Stanberg say that awareness and consciousness is evident when one witnesses potential evidence about oneself, one has inner awareness of this witnessing, one has a current awareness in thought of one or more features in one's character or personality. One brings self-witnessed evidence to bear in judging others. Piaget introduces that consciousness has 4 phases, each informing the other until each is integrated. He saw these as different periods of intellectual and moral reasoning. Sensio-motor, before the age of 2, pre-operational, from the ages of 2 till 7, operational, from 7 to 12 years of age, and finally the formal, between the ages of 12 and 18. Lewin purports that is a concept of ownership and property in the 2nd or 3rd year. The I, or self, is only gradually formed, perhaps in the 2nd or the 3rd year. Not until then does a concept of property appear, of the belonging to a thing, to his own person. Allport, 2 years later in 1937, suggests that by the age of 2, a child may have consciousness, whilst the concept of self-consciousness has not been developed. Both Howitz and Moreno consider that consciousness was developed by socialisation in reference to how individuals manage groups. So, taking account of professionals of the past, I would like to cite Daniel Stern and his theory of child development, which is more recent, from 85 and 98. Stern's theory is that a sense of stages which are mutually supporting and overlapping the sense of the emergent self, which forms between birth and 2 months. Later, between 2 and 6 months, a sense of a core sense is experienced. The next period is when the core sense with another is recognised, followed between 7 and 15 months when a subjective self is formed, and later a verbal self during the 2nd year of life, and followed by the final stage of narrative self or selves. It is here, at the age of 4 or older, that children can relate stories where psychological explanations are implanted within the story and the child's identity is formed. Of course, the child may choose at this stage to distort reality too, as any parent knows. So Stern suggests that all of these layers contribute to the formation of consciousness. I could not have included all opinions and theories in this keynote speech. However, I am pleased to share with you my research on what consciousness is, when our evolution, when it was likely to have formed, and when, as we see our children, or indeed our children's children, layers of consciousness is formed. As a gestaltist, when working with clients, I am not interested in the why. I can understand that due to our society and our culture, many will believe it is necessary for the striving of meaning. I am curious how people are in the moment and how they relate to themselves, to others, and to me. For me, my curiosity is drawn to how they strive, what they are striving for, and to consider what they are not striving for, as this informs me as a practitioner. I am often reminded, as clients confuse and confound themselves when looking at the why, they lose interest in the what and the how they are. In my practice, my vested interest is to raise their awareness, how they are, what and how they do. If clients are to make changes in their lives, they can, with a new awareness, make choiceful, meaningful changes, or choose not to, of course. In knowing and accepting what is, their capacity for conscious choices can allow clients to facilitate change. I believe that consciousness is a process of experience, which, unlike anything else, there are viewpoints in the philosopher of Jean-Paul Sartre and the psychologist Daniel Robertson who agrees that consciousness is sui generis, that is, it is not like anything else. McGinn, in 1991, said that consciousness is consciousness and like nothing else. So, as we go forward to the workshops and considers man's striving for meaning, you may mull over how consciousness allows the curiosity to form. For all of us here, I imagine that we are accepting of having our consciousness raised, and indeed welcome the prospect. To choose with an open heart and mind with consciousness the workshops you will attend today, I wish you all heightened awareness. I am grateful and honoured to have had this opportunity to share with you my findings. Thank you for your attention and time. Go well.